Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today I'm on the 922 test server to bring you a preview of a brand new Tier 10 Soviet medium tank. It is the Object 430U, which will be replacing the standard Object 430 next patch. This vehicle is going to have the highest alpha damage of any Soviet medium tank with 440 alpha, and it also has the thickest frontal hull armor in any medium tank in the game at 160mm on the upper plate. Stick around, I'm going to let you know everything you need to know about this vehicle, and if you have no interest in picking it up, maybe give you a few tips and tricks as to how to take it out after I run down the full statistics of this tank and show you how it stacks up to some of its competition. So without further ado, let's get started. So let's compare the Object 430U to the Chinese Tier 10 medium tank, the 121, its Soviet competition in the form of the T62A, and a Chinese heavy tank, the 113. Immediately we notice the damage per minute of this tank is not exactly exceptional, and when we compare it to all of the other Tier 10 medium tanks in the game, we can see that it just pales compared to its Tier 10 Soviet competition, and it's all the way down the list here between the TVP and the E50M. And it's pretty weird to have a Tier 10 medium tank that has lower DPM than a Chinese heavy tank, as it does fire 5.88 rounds a minute with its 122mm main armament compared to the 6 rounds a minute that the 113 fires. But of course, what's special about this tank is that 440 alpha, but let's not forget that the 121 has always had 440 alpha, and it has higher DPM and higher pen, and it hasn't been very special, or at least played a lot outside of kind of a niche market. In addition, the shell velocity of the 430U is disappointing. 940 meters makes it hard to snipe at long range, unlike the T62A with 1,535 meters a second shell velocity. This is one of the downsides of going up in the caliber of your round, but thankfully the vehicle carries 50 rounds, which gives it a potential damage of 22,000, pretty much enough to kill the enemy team multiple times over in most cases. Next up, gun handling, and this is where the 430U is pretty good. 2.3 seconds aim time, way better than the 121 and the 113. Dispersion values when moving at 0.12, better than the 121 and the 113. Its turret traverse dispersion is better than the 121 at 0.1, but it's slightly worse than the 113. But of course, this 122mm caliber gun doesn't perform nearly as well as the T62A. But I guess if you're going to have to stop to shoot less, then it's going to kind of balance it out with the alpha damage. And this is not bad gun handling for a larger caliber gun. However, look at the dispersion, aka the accuracy of this gun, 0.4. That's absolutely awful, way worse than the 121 and the T62A, and still significantly worse than the 113. When we compare this to all of the other Tier 10 medium tanks in the game, we can see that it is the joint least accurate Tier 10 medium, so you definitely don't want to be sniping in the 430U. Furthermore, the depression of this vehicle is 5 degrees, the same as the 121 and the T62A. That's significantly worse than the 113, which can now depress its gun at 7 degrees over the side, which allows it to work ridge lines much better than the new Tier 10 Soviet medium. But as I'm going to highlight later with the armor, this 5 degrees, there's some mitigating factors there. But firstly, mobility. It's kind of mediocre with regards to its mobility. 50 kilometers an hour forwards, worse than the 121. 18 backwards, worse than the other two medium tanks. And its power to weight is 14.29. Just a little bit worse than the 121, significantly worse than the T62A and the 113, but its ground resistance is at least just a touch better than the 121, but worse than the T62A, but better than the 113. So in this comparison, I feel that the T62A will be the faster vehicle, then the 430U will be practically the same as the 121, and then the 113 will be good at accelerating upslope, but when it has to start turning, it does lose a lot of its speed with its traverse. And that's where the 430U will be way better than the Chinese heavy tanks at brawling in close quarters combat and making those micro movement adjustments to keep the thick part of your tank towards your opponents and hopefully keep flanking them. So far we've heard that the 430U doesn't exactly have exceptional firepower. Its gun handling, well, it's okay for a large caliber gun, but it's got the worst accuracy of any of the Tier 10 mediums, and its mobility is kind of just as bad as a heavy tank. But just check out the armor. This is where the 430U specializes. 160 at the front of the hull, 90 at the side, 300mm at the front of the turret with 195mm at the side. And this 160mm is all over the front of the upper plate, and if you're not angling this tank at all, you still have 260 to 270mm of effective armor. This means that standard rounds from a Tier 10 tank are pretty much going to have a 40 to 50% chance chance of going through your upper hull. As soon as you angle it like this, now you've got about 280, 270 millimeters, and they're going to be probably more like a quarter of successful penetrations. Of course, the lower plate on this tank is 105 millimeters thick, and while it is kind of angled, as we can see here, it's still not exceptional. Even angled like this, tier 8 tanks are still going to be able to go through it. So do everything that you can to shoot the 430U in the lower plate, or if you're driving one, hide it. Now the side armor on this tank, it's 90 millimeters all the way down here and 60 millimeters above that. But look how the mid upper part of the side of the hull is angled. It's a lot like an IS-7, and so that means that even if you over angle the side of this hull like this, it's still going to ricochet. And they've got to get through 30 millimeters of spaced armor as well, which provides this vehicle with good protection from high explosive rounds and especially heat rounds. But of course, if a 430U does over angle their tank like this, just shoot them in the front of the track. You're not only going to take it off and immobilize the tank, but you're going to go through it even with mediocre amounts of penetration. But a 430U, if he angles correctly like this and side scrapes out around a corner, is still going to have darn impressive armor. The whole of the side of the tank is going to be a ricochet, and the upper plate here is about 280 millimeters thick. Don't know why Tanks GG is having some kind of an artifact bug over with the front of the tank here. That's definitely not the case. But next up, turret, and this is just ridiculous. 300 millimeters to 330 millimeters of turret armor, absolutely fantastic for a medium. And the cupolas on this tank, well, they're not a weakness, so don't get tricked into it, because they're 257 millimeters thick and they've got an angle to them as well. And so even if you're kind of above the tank like this, you still have to get through about 290 millimeters of armor. And so this is the equivalent of a T62A turret. I would feel comfortable with pretty much everything shooting me here, apart from maybe tier 10 tank destroyers firing premium rounds, or of course high explosive rounds. And thankfully the top of the tank is not going to get overmatched unless you're getting shot by a Yank Panzer E100. So great news for the 430U's durability, and that's compounded by the fact that it has 2,000 hit points, and also its view range is great at 400 meters, and so you're going to be spotting for yourself with coated optics exceptionally well. And if you have a great crew, then you could probably give up the coated optics to use vents to try and maximize the other aspects of this tank. But there's one important characteristic to take into account with the Object 430, and that is the camo rating. The 430U is quite low profile, which gives it a 37.77% camo rating when it's stationary and a 29% camo rating when it's moving. That just completely obliterates the camo rating of the 113, which can't even get towards 15% and 8% when moving, and even the 121 with a full concealment crew, 32% and 25% when moving. And so for a heavily armored tank, the 430U is also a rather sneaky one. But you know what, I think that's quite enough theory crafting. Let's see how this thing performs on the battlefield. And one thing I'd just like to clarify is that this camouflage is not as standard on this vehicle. It was a permanent star from Wargaming Fest, and I guess I should show you what the tank looks like without it. So firstly, we're going to be duking it out on Kharkiv, probably one of the better maps for this tank. Lots of opportunities to hide your lower plate on bits of rubble, only expose your turret, and a map that doesn't really require much, if any, gun depression. Of course, there are a few positions that you can use, but all of it really is going to be very suitable for the 5 degrees of gun depression that the Object 430U has. Now, do take that into consideration, that this tank, while it's still going to be able to probably find locations it can use on every single map. Yeah, look at this, our gun depression just over that tiny little ridge line there. This tiny little bump did manage to buck up there. It's not a disaster. 5 degrees of gun depression is fairly standard on a lot of Soviet tanks, but it's definitely not exceptional and something you should take into account. So we managed to put 2 rounds there into the 430U as he managed to get into position. And now he's going to be fighting a Rheinmetall Panzerwagen who is on full health. He puts 1 round into him. I don't really want to expose myself because I don't want this Object 140 to shoot me in the side. But I decide, well, this Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, he's not exactly doing very well, is he? So I might try and go and give him a little bit of help. And thankfully, he manages to stay alive and the 140 misses him, so we've kept him in the game. But now I decide to take my opportunity to advance. I'm going to put 1 on the move into the 140, but of course you can't overmatch that tank's turret anymore. I get shot by a 705A in the side, try and shoot his cupola. Actually, I don't take the risk. In retrospect, I guess I'm just trying to save the shot because I need to start to get into this position, and this is what this tank is designed to do. Just expose its upper hull armor, hide its lower plate, only expose its turret and its upper hull, and this is where this thing is an absolute daddy. Sure, it doesn't have AAA DPM, but when everybody's bouncing off you, even with heat rounds there, and you can control the engagement, then you can just grind people out. One thing I would like to highlight, however, is that I am using a full set of equipment, bonded equipment, on this tank, so do take that into account that this is the utter max DPM that you can have on the vehicle. So this object, I can't get these names right so far, 705A is going to be very aggressive. He puts one into us, but look at this. Oh, well done, son. You've now managed to expose yourself to all of the vehicles on my team. And so we've locked him down in place, and we're just running rings around him, and this is where the mobility of this vehicle is rather nice. Have no idea how that shell went there. That has to be down to lag on the server, and now the 907 has us. I'm going to put one into his lower plate at the back, and unfortunately for me, am I going to get through this one? Doesn't look like it. Can I finish off the 705A before I go down? Yes, I can, because I ricochet him. But that sneaky 140 comes in behind me. But 4,600 damage in 2.5 minutes here. It was one of the best brawling examples of the tank on all of my games on the test server. Just how I was able to run rings around this heavy, that's something that the 113 just couldn't do. And while the DPM of this tank definitely can't live up to the Object 907 or the 140, when I had them in this position where I was only exposing my upper hull armor and my turret, it doesn't really matter how much DPM you've got. And it's not like this thing has 2,000 DPM or 2,100 DPM. It's still got enough to be able to pick apart its opponents at least fairly quickly. Next up, we're rolling out on Arctic region, and I can't quite decide where I want to go. You'll see that I was looking to the right there. Do I want to go to the north of the map? If I go on the north, there are going to be loads of positions around here that I could use. I could also just sit in this location. I could eventually try and make an aggressive play to get into this dip and fight out along the ridge lines. But seeing how the majority of the enemy team are heavy tanks with some tank destroyers who are likely to sit around here and possibly back here, I want to go fight the south. And, you know, this tank, definitely not the fastest to be able to get into position, 50 kilometers an hour, but it's not terrible. It's not like an M48, for example. Not quite as good as the 140. It's a bit slower than the 430 was, the standard 430 when it was at tier 10. That was limited to 55 kilometers an hour. And look, some tanks like the IS-7 are able to rush into position pretty much as quickly, or even faster. When the IS-7 goes down slope, you know, at 60, it's definitely going to be able to keep up. But now I'm here. Hopefully we can see what this turret is all about on this tank. Going to try and snipe one into the top of the tank there. And this is where you're going to notice that the aim time on this vehicle is very nice. The aim time is absolutely lovely. But the problem is with the accuracy. Unfortunately, because I'm using this silly paint job, I can't actually see where that heat round went in on this tank. Usually if it was a green paint, we could tell exactly where the heat round went in. But he manages to pen us again. Oh, come on. I was hoping that the side armor on this tank was going to be able to hold up, but he managed to shoot us right in the, I guess, up into the side armor there, so it didn't work out. But in this scenario, we've got our team playing aggressively and we can just play the supporting role. Nothing too hard here. Hopefully we're going to try and make use of as many armor-piercing rounds as I possibly can, at least until we're going to need a few, probably on the heavier tanks, in a second. So the IS-7 decides to go to his grisly demise, I guess, drown himself. I'm not sure if he was forced to drown there or if he decided to do it, but you know what, it's a test server, you can't be too annoyed about people doing that. So I'm going to go up and try and shoot an armor-piercing round into the lower plate of E3, but as we can see, unable to go through there. With 0.4 accuracy, you would be very lucky to do so. So now we're going to dab that 2 key and we're going to use the heat rounds on this tank. And you know what, when you're shooting at a Type 5 Heavy, what's he testing on the test server? He's testing a big old derp gun. I guess if he wants to go and pick up the vehicle himself on the test server, right? Well, we're going to, I guess, test how heat rounds rebalance that tier 10 Japanese heavy tank, huh? First 2 rounds in 5-2-1, that's a big old roll. It's always a bit weird. It was very weird playing this tank on the test server. When I'm playing my tier 10 Soviet medium tanks, you're so used to doing 300 damage, 320 damage. Sometimes you roll below 300. Sometimes you can roll a little bit higher in the 300s. But this gun, on the other hand, when you're starting to put in 500 high rolls, that's rather nice indeed. Okay, so the Type 5 Heavy just slowly grinding him down here. I mean, what to say? Heat rounds just make the armor of tier 10 medium tanks absolutely useless, but if I was to fire armor-piercing rounds here, I would do practically no damage to him whatsoever. But we managed to put in this one as well. We're aiming for the weak point on the side of his tank, but do you know what, in this vehicle, you're probably not best to aim for weak points. It's not like this is a Stridsvagn 103B or even an Object 140 or a T62A. When you've got 0.4 accuracy, you're usually best to just aim at the thick part of the tank or try and close the distance to try and make that gun work irrelevant. So we're going to push in here. I was thinking about going around towards the right, but I'm thinking this guy, surely he's facing the dead tank on his side, but no, he's not. Okay, so I tried to put one through the side of his tank. He absorbs it, and oh no, Type 4 Heavy. Can we put one through the side of his tank? I don't feel comfortable with doing so because I was actually loading an armor-piercing round because I don't want to try and gold noob as much as I can on the test server, and so that actually means that he manages to penetrate us, and of course I can't go through his weak point with a standard round. Now I start to load heat again, and that's a perfect example of where you try to cheap out and not fire premium ammunition in the current meta, especially when you're in a tier 10 only matchup and there are tanks like the Type 5 Heavy, which is dubiously balanced, that if you fire, I just wasted 2 armor-piercing rounds because I tried to be efficient and not waste the premium rounds there. Whereas if I had fired a premium round, I would have survived that 550 damage that I took from him and not wasted the 2 shots. Nevertheless, the 111.5A more premium rounds entering into the tank. We finish him off, and now we're going to load an armor-piercing round here to see if we can go after this E100 in the side. Okay, I think the reason why I'm talking so much about ammunition is because while I am playing on a test server and hardly anybody wants to fire non-premium ammunition, I just want to give you guys an idea of what you can do with this tank, even with 0.4 accuracy, with standard rounds, without just YOLOing in those heat rounds and kind of compensating for the accuracy on this tank. And thinking about it, I guess that's probably going to be a big factor in this vehicle, that 0.4 accuracy. And I presume that, will it be one of the more expensive tanks to play? But then again, kind of not, because the standard rounds on this tank have so much more alpha damage at 440 that even if you do damp that 2 key, I mean, a 140 is only doing 320 with its premium rounds. This, on the other hand, is going to be doing 440, which will be a big advantage. So whether it's actually going to work out to be a cheaper tank to play, I have to try and think that one through. Hopefully we can get into position here to finish off this tank, and no, E100, don't do it! Oh, come on. We're on a bit of a roll there. We're up to 6k damage. I was hoping that we could put at least 1 or 2 rounds into the E100 at the end of the game, but he denies us. Nevertheless, let's just take a quick look at the post-game stats. Unfortunately, for some reason, we can't upload replays onto the WOT Replays website from the test server, so I'm going to use the awesome WOT Replay Analyzer to still take a look here. So how did we do in this tank? 4,600 damage in our 2 minute and 35 second life. Not bad. We finish on top of damage here, on top of experience here, and we also managed to make a decent profit because I avoid spanking those premium rounds. Next up on Arctic region, this was actually a first class. We must have been just short of an ace because of that pesky E100 finishing us off. Nevertheless, top on damage by half and also top on experience here. And while this time the armor of the tank didn't exactly hold up, I wasn't putting myself in a position to really use my armor effectively. I was more trying to farm that damage up. But I think the armor of this tank kind of just dissuades your opponents from shooting you in the first place, so it's inevitably useful, and I'm just waiting to see what this tank will do in a tier 8 and tier 9 game. All of the games that I had on the test server were people firing in premium rounds, and everybody was driving tier 10 tanks. Of course, every tank that solely relies on its armor, and when people aren't just having all of the credits in the world to fire premium rounds, is going to do so much better on the live server. And so I guess the question arises, is this tank completely overpowered, or is it pretty balanced? Well, the thing is when we compare it to the 121 and the 113, it clearly has the worst gun. It has slightly better aim time, but worse accuracy. Its mobility is pretty much the same. And so it all comes down to the armor of this tank. And while it has less hit points than the 113, and I'd say apart from for the cupolas, the 113's turret is absolutely awesome and its upper hull is as well, I'd say if this tank is overpowered, then probably the 113 and the 121 kind of is as well. But I guess the thing that the 430 does is that the 121's armor, sure, it's great against tier 8 and tier 9 tanks, but it's always struggled against tier 10 and also against premium rounds, at least with regards to the upper plate. The 430U just takes that upper hull armor to the extreme. A lot like on the 113, it provides some very stiff competition for it. And while I don't think that this vehicle is going to completely replace the Object 140 as the new flavor of the month tier 10 medium, it's definitely a good vehicle. And depending on what Wargaming do with it in the second stage of the test server, and I'd just like to clarify, all of these statistics are subject to change, it's definitely going to be one to keep an eye out for. And so that's about it for today, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed this video, or maybe it was just useful to you. If it was, give it a thumbs up, but if you absolutely hated it, give it a thumbs down. And if you're watching this video as it's released on Sunday, it's time for another World of Tanks Tech Tree Showcase on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And this week, 534 of you have voted, and the winner is going to be the Tier 10 Soviet tank destroyer, the Object 263. I guess because it's soon going to be moved down to Tier 9 and replaced by the Object 268 version 4, which I'm going to feature on the channel fairly soon. And if you've never been to one of my Tech Tree Showcases before, they're miniature tank reviews starting from Tier 1, working my way all the way up towards Tier 10, and this week culminating with the Object 263, so you can see if it's a line that's maybe worth grinding, especially if you want to prepare for the Object 268 version 4, or alternatively, if you already have the tanks, then maybe pick up a few tips and tricks along the way, or maybe you guys can just have a swan song as I play the Object 263 at Tier 10 for pretty much the last time. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible right now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.